Welcome back to Gruber Motors. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Tesla Roadster podcast.
So, our special guest today unfortunately had to bow out, Conrad Buck in Germany. And for him, it was 1 o'clock a.m. in the morning. And he was ready to go live with us, but he had a plane to catch at 6 a.m. in the morning. And he said he was falling asleep at his desk. So he bowed out. He said he'll join us in a morning show at some point. So we apologize. We have some other talking points for you, but it will not include Conrad Buck, at least in this session. A little bit of background about Conrad and his organizations, and this is what we were going to ask him: is how did he come up with the company name of Mars Orbiter? And so that was one of the things we were going to ask him. He is in a town called Malsfeld, Germany. And if we can throw up the picture of the map, I don't know how visible that's going to be because I've darkened it a bit. But you can see that he's basically in the center toward the north of Germany. So he's somewhat centrally located. And what we know about Conrad, in fact, he came to visit us a few years ago, is that he's a roadster, very passionate about roadsters, very passionate about the preservation of the roadster, the fact that it deserves to be maintained, and he has converted his auto shop to being an excellent roadster repair organization. So he has a website. If you guys want to see it, it's Mars Orbiter in Malsfeld, Germany. And when we get him on one of these podcasts, he can certainly elaborate quite a bit more. They repair more than just roadsters, of course. There aren't quite enough to, sustain a business in Germany. Also work on other Teslas, the out of warranty Teslas. Is that map available, guys?
I'm connecting to the studio server. Is it one of the images?
Yeah, it's one of the images, and it is called the Map of Germany.
Okay, give me 1 second.
And Smuggler just came in. He says, "Hello, this is the Roadster Talk." It is indeed. We'll probably cover a bit more subjects today because we don't have our guest speaker who was going to focus us on roadsters. So if you guys want to insert some questions that are non-roadster related, we'll see how it goes, and we can we can deal with some of those as well.
Most definitely, and welcome this afternoon, Smuggler. Good to see you back.
So that image will be up here shortly, and then you can see where Conrad's shop is located. On his website, he has quite a bit of information. He also has one roadster for sale out there, and I think it was VIN 919, an Obsidian Black in Germany. So he's doing what we basically do, which is have a matchmaking service for roadsters.
I wonder if when he had his shop renamed, or when he renamed his shop, if I remember right, the early the Roadster that Elon Musk launched out into space was believed for a while that it was going to be orbiting Mars. Now we know now that it's on its own orbit, kind of a unique orbit. It kind of flies in between Mars and Earth, and it's orbiting the sun and not Mars. But I'm wondering if that had anything to do with the name.
Could be. And of course, when we get a chance to get him on a podcast, we're going to reveal all of that. The background picture, by the way, was selected because of our guest, Mars Orbiter. We thought we would put up a space picture. And by the way, a lot of people think that this car out in space is Elon's Founders Series #1 car. He owns one, Martin Eberhard owns two, and one of our customers actually sent us Founders VIN #3, which is currently in our service center and is available for sale. Highly collectible Roadster. But the VIN on that Roadster in space is not #1, it's VIN 686, and it is a custom midnight cherry color. So, I'm sure that Elon thought that he would send a car that isn't quite that valuable or collectible. And he chose, since he had two of them, he sent the one that wasn't. I'm getting pointed
Image is up there.
Oh, the image of so there you go. I hope that isn't too dark. I was trying to highlight the area where his shop is. And in this particular view, it's such a small town that it doesn't even show up in terms of having a name on the map. But what's interesting about this is you can see how small Europe really is. You can see Poland there to the right. You can see Belgium to the left. And it's kind of like here in the United States. We have states, they have countries.
Right.
And here in the States, we would probably get pretty freaked out if in every state you went to, you had a different language you had to contend with and learn. That's the way Europe works, and that's why they're bilingual and multilingual often, is because, the proximity.
Well, and they don't even think anything about it. They look at us and they say, "Oh, you poor thing, you only speak English."
And of course, they all speak English as well because that's taught in the schools in Germany, at least. That's a second language. So moving along here, we've got another question. Smuggler, so any additional info on the economical Tesla that I may have missed? We've been dancing around that issue with the news items virtually every single morning show. And so far, there isn't anything really concrete that's available yet. A lot of speculation. It'll be built in Mexico, for example.
Yes.
And it's a $25,000 car. And then there are other companies that are coming out with $25,000 or less cars.
There are, and and there's speculation that the 4680 battery pack is going to be a smaller version of that pack is going to be used, and production processes are being streamlined. But a lot of what we're hearing right now are rumors, so not a lot of additional hard info, Smuggler.
Yeah. If we can throw up another picture, getting back to a Roadster topic here, it's the picture called Decals, and what we're showing here is the Prindle buttons, and they call it Prindle because there's a low in there. It's drive, reverse, neutral, and there is no low on the Roadster, so it's actually DNPR. But anyway, these buttons on a 2.0 Roadster tend to wear out. They're kind of like elevator buttons, and with a lot of use, they get scratched off, and eventually you can't quite see the letter anymore. So one of the things that we've been doing for a few years is offering sticker decals that you can overlay onto your shift buttons in a 2.0 Roadster. They're available on our website, and you can see them in the e-store here. What's the price on that? $39.95? Yeah. So our service manager is a transfer letter whiz, embroidery, silk screening, all of that. He's actually developed, and I don't have it with me here because we weren't prepared to really go into talking points on Roadsters, but we'll bring it in the next Wednesday podcast. He's developed carbon fiber buttons.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And, there's light behind these, so when it's illuminated, you can actually see a nice carbon fiber effect. And, of course, most Roadster people like carbon fiber.
Sure.
They either put it internally and even the binnacle and the door sills, or outside on the hood vanes, the spoiler, the front nose lip. So we think that this will become a popular product. As people wear out their buttons, they can now convert that to a carbon fiber version.
Oh, that's going to look just fantastic on that Roadster. I could even imagine the all carbon fiber Roadster that we worked on a few years ago, seeing those buttons added to that too.
Which you could then say is carbon fiber overload.
Yes.
All right, so moving along here, that will be something we'll have in the next podcast. Another interesting thing that occurred this week was, if you remember the Tesla Roadster World Traveler, and I wish I had the VIN in front of me here now. I didn't bring that. 512, I think it was. But anyway, it was a Roadster that went around the world in 2012. And the goal was to use emission-free transportation to prove that you don't need any, fossil fuels to transport people. Well, this Roadster became pretty famous as a result, and a museum in Munich asked if they could display this Roadster after it was done doing this circle around the world. So the owner, he ended up giving them this Roadster for a year, and it turns out it was so popular, the museum said hundreds of thousands of people went through this exhibit to see this Roadster. So they asked if they could keep it another 6 months. Well, the owner was, generous, and he said, sure, fine, let's do that. Well, it turns out that the first team for the first year properly charged the Roadster. The second team apparently was not well trained, and the Roadster got bricked. And in the world of Roadsters, of course, it means that it went dead. So he was now faced with how do I get my Roadster running again? And he ended up deciding to ship the Roadster to us to Phoenix. Now, okay, bear in mind, it went from Munich to Hamburg, which is a port city. From there, he was trying to find ocean transport, but being an emission-free type effort vehicle, he was trying to find a boat that was not motorized. And aside from the small fishing boats, which certainly couldn't accommodate a Roadster, he finally found a clipper ship, a big sail ship, unmotorized, and decided that's the ship that I would like to ship my Roadster with. Well, it turned out to be quite advantageous because the clipper ship was going with an empty cargo to Miami from Hamburg, so they were able to put the Roadster down in the cargo hold. Within a few weeks, we're going to repost some of the pictures of this famous world-traveling Roadster, and you'll be able to see some of these pictures as well again. So anyway, it comes all the way across the ocean using sails, clipper ship sails. And then it gets stuck around Cuba for 2 weeks because the winds were not favorable. And you kind of forget about that, you know. If it's a boat, you just turn on the motor and you go where you need to go. So it got stuck for 2 weeks, hovering around Cuba, Havana actually, and eventually the wind shifted and they were able to bring it to Miami. So the car finally gets to Miami. Now we're faced with how do we get it to Phoenix emission-free? Well, this was the end of last year, and the Tesla Semi was not quite yet ready for that type of transport,
Right.
nor had they sold any to any transporters. So they broke a rule and said, all right, to get it to Gruber, we're going to have to use a diesel truck in order to, transport it. So anyway, long story short, the car finally comes into our shop. From there, it went to the Tempe Service Center for the main battery replacement, and we got wonderful support from Tesla. They put us at the head of the line, realizing that this is a world-famous Roadster. We got the car into the service center within the first month that it arrived here, and just a couple days ago, it came back to our service center for some additional work. We resolved some problems with the GPS system. And now we're going to talk to them about weatherizing this Roadster, because one of the problems that occurred after the battery swap at the Tesla Service Center in Tempe was corrosion on a GPS module. And we looked at it and looked around the car, and the car had definitely been out in the rain for a portion of its life. Again, as we have said many times, Roadsters do not like rain. They are not quite waterproof, and they really do need a rain jacket in order to be out in the rain. There are a number of items on a Roadster that are not waterproof and can cause problems. The first one, we've got an image of this, guys. Can you throw up the HVAC controller in a 2.0 Roadster, which is what this Roadster is? This little guy sits underneath the hood of the Roadster. And if you remember, the hood on a Roadster is not contiguous. There are hood vanes, and there are big gaps between those vanes. And when it rains, that water goes right between those slats, and it starts hitting the items below the hood. Well, this little HVAC controller is not waterproof for two reasons. One is, as it ages, there are gaskets on both sides of the panels that compress, and eventually water finds its way inside the HVAC controller. There's also a little red LED. It's I think the image is called HVAC controller. Not in there. Okay.
I'm looking it up right now on the website.
Actually, it's called Yasaki connector. Sorry about that. And the reason we call it Yasaki connector is that's a whole nother problem. This thing isn't repairable until we get some connectors. There's a long story there. I'll go into that in a while. There we go. That's the guy. And if you notice the caps on both ends, there's a gasket that is compressed and that is sticking out from those 2 points. That's not waterproof. And then there's a small LED in between those orange connectors, which is also not waterproof. Now, here's the problem. If you get water into some electronics, and there's no voltage in there, if it's distilled water, you're fine. you know?
Sure.
But it turns out that this little box, and that's the reason for the orange connectors, is a 400 volt device. Anything orange in EVs has high voltage floating on it. So you've got 400 volts going in this, and you've got 12 volts going into this, and you have chips and MOSFETs and parts inside that operate off 12 volts. So as you get water in here, eventually the water is oftentimes conductive. And if you get 400 volts into those low voltage etches on that circuit board, it begins to destroy some of those chips and some of those semiconductors. So that's the reason this thing is so sensitive and a good idea to weatherproof. So what we end up doing is we actually completely weatherproof this, so in the future there is no water that can get into this. The other part that we find on a Tesla Roadster that is not waterproof, that oftentimes corrodes and eventually fails, is the charge port door, the light ring. Now, this is a part that will not kill the car. This HVAC controller does kill the car because it's part of the high voltage interlock loop, as they call it. And for safety reasons, if you get any kind of disruption in that interlock, indicating that there's a problem with the high voltage, for safety reasons, they shut it down. The charge port door is only 12 volts, and the symptoms there when it fails is you simply don't get lights anymore, or you get only part of the lights, or the colors change a bit. So those are two areas on this world-traveling Roadster that we're going to weatherproof, and of course the GPS module.
Right.
And any other modules that are external to the Roadster so that this car can continue to travel around the world. So Smuggler says, Mexico was the only thing I could find. We are in some interesting times in the EV world. Oh, there's a previous comment there. He says, is there any additional info on the economical Tesla that that he may have missed? So yeah, Mexico did come up as the manufacturing point for a...
Yeah, that's one of the few things that we are pretty well settled on. And I agree with Smuggler. We are in some very interesting times. I like to look back in history and see between 1915 and 1930, all of the automobile companies that came into existence during that point in time. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to what we see now. Van Goat Wagon has joined us this afternoon, and good afternoon. I agree with his comment too. Orange kills.
Mm-hmm. So I've got another news item here, not quite Roadster related, but it happened during the Roadster days, so I thought I would throw that in here. Tesla has oftentimes had problems with people leaking sensitive information. And it's not a nefarious attempt to hide things from the public. There are certain things within any company that until they are resolved, discovered, analyzed, you really don't want to release that to media or to the general public because you don't have the entire story yet. Well, it turns out that Tesla in 2008 had some problems with a lot of leaks that were getting to the news organizations. And, unfortunately, media thrives on collecting dirt at times because it sells. It sells advertising. It generates clicks, much more than good news. That's why when you go home and watch the news, you're going to see about 90% bad news. Who got killed? Who was in an accident? Where was the fire? all of that.
Look at what Fox News agreed to pay to Dominion Voting Systems just this week. $787 million says bad news and controversial stories sell.
Amazing, huh?
Yes.
My God, that's almost $1 billion when you think about it. That's got to sink the company. I can't imagine that they can weather that kind of a...
They even came to a settlement of that, so I'm... Wow. Amazing.
So anyway, lots of leaking was going on, and I don't know whether this was Elon's idea or his team. Remember, Elon has a very talented group of people that are making the magic happen. SpaceX, Tesla, the Boring Company, Neuralink. All of these companies, there's some very talented people. But anyway, what they ended up doing was to try to find the source of these leaks was brilliant. They began to send emails that could potentially have leaked, but They put simple changes in each one that were not quite visible. The way the article reads is, the smart move was simple. Each mail had either one or two spaces between words, forming a binary signature that identified or made that email to that particular person unique. So obviously, when now this, got leaked, they were able to trace it back and find the source of these leaks.
I think that's a fascinating thing, and when you think about it, spaces between 9 words, that would be 8 spaces. You can already take and put 256 variations into an 8-word long email.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't take much more than a paragraph, and you'd be able to do a binary signature for tens of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully they didn't have that many leakers, but yeah.
But then in 2008, the Tesla obviously didn't have nearly that many people working for them as well.
Right. All right, let's see if we got any questions here. Doesn't look like any new ones. I have a Roadster story for you, and this one actually came out of the Tesla Motors Club forum. For those of you unfamiliar with that, there's a website called TMC, or the Tesla Motors Club. And this is a forum that's been around for over a decade. And what it is it's a place where owners, and not just Roadster at this point, but the owners can go to share ideas, give advice, answer questions, for tech support, all of that. Good places for, or good resources for the community, basically. So I got this out of TMC, and apparently there's a story here. It was a charging location at Harris Ranch in 2010, long before superchargers, that a bunch of Tesla people went to. Now remember, in 2010, there were no Model S's yet on the road.
That's right. Model S's didn't start until 2013, correct?
12.
2012 had the very first one, so that's right.
In fact, there's one in town here that was customized. Well, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So in 2010, a bunch of Roadster owners went to this charger location opening, and there was an overnight stay there, and one of the owners got up in the morning and found that his Roadster during the night, which was charging, came up with a service required warning on the vehicle display screen. And it was a type of warning where it wasn't just an alert that you click through, it actually killed the car. And he wasn't going to be able to get home. Fortunately, it says, J.B. Straubel was speaking at the event, and he had also driven there in a Roadster. So they called him over, being the chief technology officer at Tesla for 14 years. He knew a thing or two about Roadsters. And he looked at it, opened up the PEM, and he found that one of the input line fuses had blown due to a drop in line voltage during the charging, which caused the current through the fuses to increase. By the way, there was a firmware fix shortly after that prevented that from ever happening again. So what JB did was he had a full charge on his Roadster. He took his PEM apart, took his 2 fuses out, gave it to this customer that had no range, and said, I've got enough mileage to get home. So again, the kindness of a Tesla employee and an upper management employee speaks again volumes to the kind of a culture that Tesla has evolved right from the very beginning.
I think it's also appropriate that J.B. Straubel may be joining the board of directors on Tesla now in the next month or so as well.
In social media, guys, we have a picture of JB digging in that power electronics module. If we can pop that up there. There we go. And that is a 1.5 PEM. The way you can tell is he's working on the left side of the PEM. The fuses on a 2.0 PEM are on the right side. And it turns out that JB's, he had a 2.0 Roadster. The fuses were slightly different size, but he was able to fit them into this 1.5 Roadster. So again, thank you, JB, for helping a Roadster owner, even though it was 10 years ago plus.
By all means. Hey, we've had a couple of questions come in the meantime on YouTube. Jesus Melendez, whatever happened to the Roadster in the background? This is the orbiting Roadster. is it supposed to come back to Earth?
Well, the article or the newsletter that we did about 4 years ago, and it was in April, I think early April, there's your first clue, was that there was a ship with a giant catcher's mitt that was prepared to catch this Roadster as it re-entered orbit because Tesla became concerned that there were no charging stations in outer space and that the battery was going to get bricked. And we released this newsletter April 1st, I think, of 2018 or 2019 or so.
Okay.
It was amazing how many people thought it was a true story. And so we kind of went with it. But anyway, the VIN number 686, which is what this Roadster is, there's a website that you can find that shows you where it's at any point in time. And you were mentioning that it's not quite orbiting Mars, which was one of the things that would have been cool.
Yes, that's right. It is actually in orbit, somewhere between Earth and Mars, and it's orbiting the sun. When we were looking up and finding out the information on this a few weeks back, learned that there is about a 20 to 25% chance that this Roadster will eventually come back to Earth. And if it does, it would burn up in the atmosphere. The reason that the percentages are so widely varying is that it will probably take somewhere around 4.5 million years for it to get back to Earth.
Wow. And wouldn't it be cool if it could actually be retrieved? Can you imagine what the worth of that Roadster would be? It's probably going to be the most collectible Roadster.
Whatever's left of it, yes.
Yeah. Very cool. So yeah, we've got some more questions coming in. TikTok user, and now we've got about 15 numbers behind that. He says, I have a Toyota Rav4EV, has a fluid leak in the motor. Can you fix it? You know, unfortunately, we're not taking any other brands at this point, although if you're touring our shop this week, there is a Porsche Taycan in there.
Right.
And we broke that rule, but the reason that's there is because the customer wants to have their wheels powder coated a particular color. It's still under warranty, so we would not get any kind of repair effort with that car. Unfortunately, we're unable to take on any addition or any different brands at this point. I can, however, recommend someone in California that is a RAV4 expert. His name is Tony Williams, and for the life of me, I can't think of the name of his shop now, but I think he's around the LA area, and he was one of the original RAV4 repair, independent repair organizations. So you might look him up.
On YouTube, Exploration has asked, what do you think the interior pieces look like of the Starman car in space?
You know, I wonder that myself.
I do too. Cold, brittle. I think I'm thinking with all the gamma radiation and stuff that's gone through, they probably most of the paint is probably already either peeled off or is just not there because you know our paint is car paint is not really designed for unfiltered UV radiation like what you'd see in space.
And the temperature, extremely cold continuously, and the cosmic radiation and the ultraviolet. Speaking of which leads us into our next topic here. Guys, can you bring up a picture of a hood on a Tesla Roadster? What we're showing here in a moment is the hood vanes on a Tesla Roadster that has been that was selected as carbon fiber. And we're finding an odd anomaly with these hood vanes, which probably indicates that Tesla at the time had multiple vendors for these. A common occurrence we're seeing is that select hood vanes become cloudy. And if you notice, the one toward the front of the car or the lower left is cloudier than the one in the middle. Mm-hmm. It is fairly common, and what we've never been able to figure out was why some discolor and some go cloudy and some don't, other than they used either different vendors, different batches of resin. It's a simple fix. What we do is we sand off the foggy resin and very carefully down to the carbon fiber layer, and then just simply recoat the parts with a UV resistant clear coat. and that tends to fix this problem. But it is not uncommon, so if your Roadster is going that way, it is repairable. The other thing that we find, we had a customer today that was looking at the roll cage or the roll bar carbon fiber cover on a Roadster, and it was yellow compared to the Roadster right next to it. That's another problem that we're seeing with some of this carbon fiber resin is that with age it yellows, and they're typically the cars that spend more time outside in the sun with a lot of UV exposure.
Jiminy Stack has weighed in on the question about the Rav4EV. Tony Williams. Tony Williams is with QC Quick Charge in California. Jiminy, welcome and thanks for joining us, and thank you very much for that comment.
Yeah, thanks for participating. Yep, that's it, Quick Charge. Okay, we've got some other questions coming in. We have YouTube visitor Lightning Rod. He says hello from Thunder Bay, Canada.
I've actually been up through Thunder Bay before. That's up, if I remember right, that's up near the Yukon Territory. It's on the Alaska-Canada Highway.
That's right. You're from Alaska, so you would know that. Yeah.
Yes. Just a couple of years ago, took that trip, and that's a gorgeous area up there.
Is it really?
It absolutely is. Just stunning. And then Van Goat Wagon on TikTok. We have a 1973 Ford Station that we take to car shows all the time. We're now seeing more Teslas show up customized. It's awesome to see.
You know, my wife was mentioning the other day, she was with a friend, and she said we couldn't believe it on the way home. We saw just dozens and dozens of Teslas. It seems like they're ubiquitous. But remember that unlike the other traditional cars from the 60s where you had radical body style changes, the Teslas pretty much tend to look the same regardless of that 10-year span that they were made in or so.
Yeah. If you don't know what a Model S 2012 to 2015 looks like versus the 2016 model versus the, in 2017 versus the later generation 2018, they just all look like a Model S. Well, by all means.
Very true. So we were watching a Tesla Roadster on Bring a Trailer. And it was a car that actually was listed here in summer of last year as well. It was a car from Scottsdale. And it's a Radiant Red 2.0 Roadster. And the pricing is what was really significant about this Roadster. What we found over the last 6 months or so is that Roadster valuation had begun to tank. Some that sold on our site were below $100,000 or just around that area. Gone were the days a year ago when you could sell a Roadster, functioning Roadster, non-pedigree for $120,000, $130,000 or so. And if it was pedigreed, it would push toward the $200,000 mark. It turns out this Roadster, which was immaculate, by the way, only 8,500 miles. It was extremely clean. When we had it up on the lift, we could see that this was a garage-kept, environmentally controlled, never been in the rain type Roadster, and lovingly maintained. It actually sold for $151,000, and with auction fees, it would be just over $160,000 for this Roadster. So we're pretty excited. It looks like Roadster valuation may be coming back. Of course, it's difficult to say that one Roadster is going to change everything. Right. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the early EV adopters here in town, John Martinson, who actually owned an EV1, later on owned a Tesla Roadster, and it was the Fusion Red, which is the Ferrari red, the really bright red. There were two cars that year, and this was like 4 years ago or so, that went to auction at Barrett-Jackson, two Roadsters, a Thunder Gray and his car, which was the Fusion Red. And we were watching the bidding on those two cars, and back then Roadsters were selling for $40,000, maybe $45,000 or so. Well, John's car was the first one to go across the auction block, and it was astonishing to watch the valuation climb. They got way past the $40,000, $45,000 range into the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. It ended up selling for $97,000.
Wow.
It was almost twice what other Roadsters were selling for. Now, what happened there was you had two people that wanted that one Roadster, and they were willing to outbid each other. The second Roadster came along, the Thunder Gray, and we thought, wow, there's a new Roadster valuation here. How exciting. Let's see what this one will sell for. It sold for $45,000, right next to one that just sold for $97,000. So anyway, although we're pleased, excited, and very optimistic that this may be a turning point, we'll have to see what the other Roadsters are selling for right after this one for $161,000 with auction fees. We have a picture of that, I think. Let's see if I put that up here. I apologize if we don't have all of the pictures today because we were expecting to have a guest today and weren't going to go into these other talking points. I don't have a picture.
While
of
you're
it.
looking for the picture, Lesko Brandon on TikTok has corrected me, and he is right. I am wrong. He said when we're talking about Thunder Bay, he says no, it's not up in the Yukon Territory. It's on the Minnesota border in Ontario. Thunder Bay is a little border town. He's right. I was thinking of Destruction Bay, which is up in the Yukon Territory and along the Alaska-Canada Highway.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
So thank you for that
Lesko.
clarification.
Yeah. All right. We have a picture, guys, of the antenna Roadster. This is the only Roadster that we are aware of that has a radio antenna mounted on it. Now, it's probably the right place for it. It looks like a large surface area there. The difficulty was when you closed this trunk lid, there were clearance issues with the bottom of the antenna because as you compress it, there's about 8 inches or so that needs to have a cavity to go into. This Roadster belongs to an owner in the Great Lakes area who keeps this on an island. And he had a particular radio station there, his favorite radio station, where the reception was poor. So he decided to put an antenna on the Roadster. Now, fast forward a bit, radio stations are waning. Streaming is now more popular. And so the antenna is no longer important. And since this car had some other sins, there was a luggage rack that was put on this without protection, and it dug into the paint and into the rear trunk lid. This owner decided, let's fix all of that. And we talked about painting it or wrapping it. And wrapping eventually won out because of the wide variations of colors that you can do, some of the even iridescent colors. And so what we did was we actually closed off this hole for this customer and did the body work on it. The front clip needed some work. And by next week, this Roadster will be sporting a new wrap and looking brand new again.
I'm really anxious to see what that looks like. So sterling silver is what that's going to be, correct?
It's the closest thing to a Roadster, a sterling silver. The color on the car right now is a Thunder Gray.
Yeah, so it's going to be a much lighter gray, silver.
Exactly.
Silver color instead. I'm looking forward to seeing that one come back.
Yep, should look good. So anyway, that's the only Tesla Roadster with antenna that we're aware of, and it is now becoming an antenna-less Roadster. All right.
I have one thing, Pete, that I learned on New News about the 2.0 Roadster, and actually a competitor to the 2.0 Roadster coming up.
Really?
British automaker MG has announced a car called the Cyberster, and they say that it beats the Tesla Roadster to the punch with a Shanghai debut. So this little 2-seater Roadster-style car, MG, I think a lot of people here will know the brand from the British car maker, is coming out with it. It has, and its top configuration has 2 motors with almost 500 horsepower. The rear motor runs a little over 300 horsepower, and the front motor runs about 150, 160 horse. Kind of light on details right now. This is kind of breaking for us. We just found out this news this afternoon. But considering the idea that the 2023 Roadster, or the Roadster 2.0, was supposed to be out in 2023, and we really still haven't heard much about it, I'll be interested to see what the reaction from Tesla is that there is now a competitor in that car space with a car that looks remarkably like what the new Roadster 2.0 is supposed to look like.
And MG, of course, is a well-known sports car manufacturer, so it's quite fitting for them. When we first heard this, somebody here said, "Oh, GM's coming out with a Roadster." No, it's MG.
Yes.
It's the U.S. version of MG, I guess. But does it have any statistics regarding the 0 to 60 time?
They do not have statistics listed in the article about the 0 to 60 time. They do talk about a maximum of 530 horsepower or 395 kilowatts of energy that it'll put out. And that's their most powerful version. So it's 201 horsepower in the front and a little over 300 horsepower on the rear motor. So it's going to be a dual motor design as well.
And from the picture you have there, based on a small car like that, a two-seater sports car, 500 horsepower is probably going to turn this into a rocket. Let's remember that the Tesla Roadster, the first generation, has 288 horsepower.
Right.
And its 0 to 60 is 3.7 seconds. So this almost doubles that, and it'd be interesting to see what the 0 to 60 on this will be.
I'll be very interested to see. It's what curb weight is electric car heavy, but still is fairly light at about 4,078 pounds on their lighter battery pack and 4,376 pounds on their extended range battery pack.
Fascinating. It looks like we've got a comment from Van Goatwagon. He's one of our regular visitors. He says, "Is this the new DeLorean, or is the new DeLorean an EV?" I don't know that. I hope so.
Van Goat, that's something that we're going to have to find out.
I think Richard's piping up here.
I do. I am. Yeah, the new DeLorean is going to be fully electric.
Fully electric, okay. And John's no longer involved. I'm assuming there's a new batch of investors, right?
I would assume so.
Okay. All right, very cool. So staying with the Tesla Roadster theme, I was looking for filler. And on our website, we have a section called Tesla Roadster Newsletters. And, we started this about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago or so, maybe even 2018. Anyway, what we did was we took the most commonly asked questions about Roadsters and did a newsletter. And they became pretty popular. People would reference them. For example, how to calculate your CAC.
Sure.
That has become very popular. In fact, this last auction that ran on Bring a Trailer, they asked the owner, what's the CAC, which has become, of course, the new parameter that Roadster owners want to see in order to determine the health of the battery. And he actually referenced our web link to this newsletter. Go here, and it tells you exactly how to extract that. We have a newsletter on tires, tire selection, paint codes. It lists all of the paint codes. And in each newsletter, and this is probably valuable to the rest of the Roadster owners, is a tech tips section at the bottom of every one of these newsletters. And what we do is describe a condition in the Roadster or something that they may not have been aware of. It's a helpful hint, basically. And I'm just going to, at random here, select one. I've got the Tesla Roadster Vehicle Display Screen Error Code newsletter. And this is when you get a cryptic code on your vehicle display screen. You're not quite sure what it means. It has a number attached. This newsletter tells you a lot more about that problem. And at the very end of this newsletter, I just realized I picked one that's a mile long because there are over 1,000 different ones, different codes. This is the tip on charging cable and extension cords. And it tells you here what kind of charge cable you're going to need and what your length limitations are with the yellow Tesla Roadster charge cable if it's not quite long enough to plug in the wall where your Roadster is. There are some limitations. The first one is you have to have a 10 gauge extension cord. 10 gauge is a 30 amp wire. The most common extension cords are usually 18 gauge, which is good for 5 amps, 16 gauge, which is good for 7 amps. It's not enough because your Roadster is going to draw a full 15 amps during a charge. So you need at least a 12 gauge, which is 16 amp wire, or 10 gauge. And then you have length limitations. Keep that extension cord length to 25 feet or less, because what happens is, even with a 30 or a 10 gauge wire, a 30 amp capable extension cord, you have line losses. And by the time it gets to that connector on your yellow charge cable, you may not have the voltage that you need.
You know, one of the easy ways a person could tell if their extension cord would be okay or not is just look at the color. Most extension cords that have the 12 or that have the 14 gauge or 16 gauge are your simple household orange extension cord with a black plugs. Those are not heavy enough. Like the Roadster's charging cord, the heavier 10 gauge cords are almost always a bright yellow color with either a white or sometimes a clear connector. Every once in a while you may have a black one, but the cord color being yellow is really kind of the key there.
Good information. So I'm in another newsletter here, and this is the wheel lock key tip. It talks about the wheel locking lug nuts. You get 5 lug nuts on a wheel on a Roadster, and one of them is going to be a locking lug nut key. And, you know, this is a Lotus holdover when there was a lot of concern about people stealing wheels. Well, as I've said many times, we are completely unaware of any Roadster owner ever saying somebody tried to or stole my wheels because they don't fit on anything.
Right.
I think there's a Pontiac at some point, a low-level Pontiac that has similar wheels, and that was about it.
Maybe like the old 1980s and 1990s Pontiac
It was in the
Fiero.
last century, yes. Yeah, exactly. So what we recommend is get rid of those locking lug nuts. They cause a lot of grief, and it's usually at the worst possible time when you've got a flat tire. And it gets towed to the auto shop, and they either break it there or it's already been broken by someone else using an impact tool on that locking lug nut key. You're supposed to use only hand tools on those, and they're fragile. And when they break, you're not going to be able to go to AutoZone and buy another one. In fact, you have to kind of scour the globe and see if you can find somebody that's got old Lotus parts. So it's a good idea to proactively get rid of those. And what you can do, since your lug nuts by that time are probably old, rusty, faded, get yourself a new set of lug nuts. Get 20 of them and change 5 on each wheel and save that key if you like for posterity. But it's much safer because then you're not going to run into that bind where you are without the key and you need to get that wheel off somehow.
Yes. On YouTube, we have a question from Exploration. Pete, what's the fastest you've ever driven a Roadster?
You know, the Roadsters aren't very fast. That's the problem. And, of course, I like speed.
Yes.
In my Viper, I got that up to almost 190 miles an hour at one point in time. Richard rides a motorcycle. Looks like he just left. All right. We were talking about, being on a crotch rocket and hitting some of those unrealistic speeds or unsafe speeds. You know, the guys, I'm going to digress here, but bear with me a moment. There's an event every year called the Isle of Man, where the craziest motorcycle riders in the world congregate, and they actually do up to 200 miles plus on these little crotch rockets down these little country roads, flying by each other. And, you know, you kind of have to make sure that you're insured at that point in time. Have some life insurance or
Yeah,
something.
life insurance, I think, is what you're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
because I'm not sure that you're going to come back from that intact. But anyway, the original question was, what's the fastest I've gone in a Roadster? They're only good for 130 miles, guys. And the reason is, back in the day, they tried a 2-speed transmission in a Roadster, but because of the torque, the Borg Warner tranny was just burning up clutch plates. It couldn't handle it. So they eventually just converted that 1.5 stick shift to forward and reverse instead of 2 speeds, and you're limited by RPMs, which is about 14,000 on that 3-phase AC induction motor, to 130 miles an hour. Now, here's an interesting concept. If you take and replace that Roadster 3-phase AC induction motor with one of these new carbon fiber type motors,
Okay.
where you don't have the steel and you don't have all that inertia, trying to explode, you could probably get more speed out of that. But no one's done it yet, and I'm not even sure how it would fit. We're talking about a Tesla Plaid motor, Richard, in a Roadster, and trying to get the RPMs up so we can go faster than 130. Do you have any thoughts about the crazy guys I talked about that go to the Isle of Man every year and do those crotch rocket races?
Well, I mean, they're certifiably insane.
Yeah. Okay.
I've seen some videos of guys just launching, over, they're coming off like this much off the ground.
Yeah.
Right. They're coming off like this much off the ground, but in the span it takes them to go up and then hit the ground again, they've gone like 45 feet.
Right.
They're barely taking off, but they're going so far. Yeah, they're insane, but it's not long before we see an electric bike make that run.
That would be fascinating.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I actually saw a Damon the other day at the gym.
Really?
Damon motorcycle. Yeah, they just came out with a line of. Oh no, I'm sorry, not a Damon. Zero.
Oh, the Zero motorcycles. Yeah, they've been around a while.
Yep, but this one is the fully fendered. It looks like a sport bike.
Oh,
you know?
okay, yeah.
So it's the first time seeing one of those, and I was pretty excited about it.
How will they be able to get enough RPMs with that electric motor to do? What are the speeds at the Isle of Man? Over 200, right?
Oh, well over 200.
Well over. Okay, all right. I mean, it's scary in a car going over 200, let alone on a motorcycle with nothing around you. I remember at speed with a motorcycle, the slightest movement, you go like this and you're already turning because of the wind. You're actually turning by moving your body.
I only got up to around 145 on my CBR, and I didn't have any gear on. I was just testing it out for the the first time after I got it, and I was on the freeway, and I felt something smacking my arm, and I turned and looked just for a second, and I see it's my own skin.
Oh, no way.
Flapping
Yeah.
and hitting myself, and I was like, okay, and I like kind of sat up and it was like, I'm good.
Yeah. Now, by the way, Richard has had a few motorcycle mishaps. There is a daughter on the way in June, and the current prevailing thought is that no more motorcycles because we're about to be responsible and be a father.
Correct.
So we're going to hold you to that.
No,
Yeah,
amen. I appreciate
Yes.
that. I got hit back in May, and so I got rid of the bike back then, and it wasn't long after that we found out that she was pregnant. And so I was like, what? God's timing is perfect. I got hit, got rid of the bike anyway. I don't have one. I don't have to have any worry about separating from it. I'm just going to have to wait, what is it, 18 years now.
18 years.
Before I get another bike.
Yes.
And then
yes.
you're going back into motorcycles.
Exactly.
Right.
But I will
plan.
go at it with, the full beard, full get up, but I'm going to
Yeah.
do the cruisers. I'm going to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
So I can see you on the great big, $30,000 Harley,
Electric Harley.
electric Harley. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Now, how are they going to get that potato sound on an electric Harley?
I don't know. I'm kind of afraid to figure out what they're going to try.
Yeah.
I mean, they might look at Dodge and think that was a great idea.
Yes, yes.
Okay, guys, we are at 58 minutes.
All right. Van Goat Wagon has a question. He says, how many Roadsters are out there? Seems like a small market. If you want to see how many Roadsters are left, we started a census program on our website about 2 years ago or so, and the cooperation has been wonderful. People register their cars. They tell us where they are. They tell us how many miles they have on it, what type of battery they have, whether they've had the replacement battery or not. And at this point, we believe it's the most comprehensive collection of Roadster information available. Any of you, by the way, that are watching that want to register your Roadster, please do so. The other thing that the census does is we send this to Tesla periodically without the personal information, of course, to keep them aware how many of you guys are out there and how important it is to continue to support the car. In fact, a year or so ago, we began a queue program for people that wanted batteries because Tesla really doesn't have an order processing system for the replacement battery for the Roadster. So we volunteered to collect that information, and on a monthly basis, we send that to them. In fall of last year, they decided they have so many customers electively choosing to replace batteries that they're going to trim it back to non-elective customers with brick Roadsters only. So if you have a dead Roadster, you can go on this list again. And in the meantime, continue to send us your information because it does seem to help getting your battery replaced if you go into this queue.
And to Van de Goat Wagon, he's right. It is a small market. It's a small community. What were there about 2,500 or so Roadsters ever made?
2412 is the exact number that I've heard. And our census program, although there are a few dupes in there, is accounting for about 2,000 Roadsters currently.
Wow.
Out of 2,400. So, which is not an unreasonable attrition rate in a small run car like that.
Yeah, that does sound about right. It's definitely is a passionate market, and we love doing this, and not because the market's so big, but because it was the forebearer of everything that we've seen since.
And if our guest was here today, on his website, Conrad Buck with Mars Orbiter in Germany, he speaks a lot on that website about how important it is to preserve the Tesla Roadster. It is an iconic car. It is very much a piece of history. It's the car that started the EV revolution, and it deserves its place in history. So it looks like we're going to wrap at this point. And we appreciate you joining us for this special Tesla Roadster podcast. It was the first time that we really had to wing it, and I think we did okay. I hope you think so too. We had a guest cancel out on us at the last minute, but it was understandable. To reiterate, Conrad is in Germany. He's got a flight at 6 a.m. in the morning. Our podcast right now puts him at 2 o'clock in the morning. So he was falling asleep at his desk waiting for us.
We'll try and get him back, though, on the morning show or some other show.
Exactly.
Yes, we'll definitely get Conrad back on one of the morning shows. And other than that, we encourage everybody here to please see us at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Tuesdays and Thursdays for the Gruber Morning Show. We talk about all things EV and green energy and fusion energy, and we have a lot of fun there.
And that's tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you guys as always, and we'll see you in the morning or next week.
Thank you.